Join me on an inspiring journey through the world of fitness, health, and performance with the Genetic Coach, where I delve deep into the genetic foundations of athletic endurance, discovering how genetics is revolutionizing our understanding of human potential and how we can unlock our full athletic capabilities through a fresh perspective on conventional practices. Last week, we spoke about perspective. We had a special guest in with us, Dr. Gerrida Uys from 3x4 Genetics. And we looked at perspective from the athlete point of view, as well as from the coach point of view. Specifically, how looking back at experiences and performance successes and even the shortcomings, how this kind of created thoughts rolling around in our heads of, could we have done things better? Could we have done them differently? Just looking at those experiences and how we have changed our thought processes around what we could be doing better going into the future. And specifically, we touched it was quite a brief touch, but we did chat about genetics and genetic testing and the insights that this type of testing offers us as coaches as well as athletes, and just even your everyday person on the street who's looking to become fit and healthy. I'd really like to start delving into what this potentially means for all of us who enjoy exercise, who have an inner athlete in ourselves and potentially have big lofty goals. And even for those athletes who are already competing at high performance levels, at elite levels, what does genetic testing give to us, and how can we really harness the insights that it offers? This is essentially where I want our conversations to start. And there's so much information out there, and I want to bring that information to you and start making it really applicable to all of us on whatever level we find ourselves. So before I go any further, I want to tell you a little bit about myself and just introduce myself. I haven't done that yet. So it's always good to start off with a little bit of history. So I come from a sports scientist background. I am a sports scientist and an educator by formal training. And then I also have a postgrad in business management. And my plan was always to try and make use of my scientific background in a business or corporate setting. And after I graduated, I went straight into corporate in a pharmaceutical company in particular, and was there for 4 years. And I kind of figured out in my 4 years there that it wasn't exactly what I wanted to do, and I wasn't in much of a happy space. So I decided I really wanted to follow my passion. And at that stage, my passion, well, still is my passion, is cycling. And I was mentored into becoming an endurance performance coach. And I kind of started on that route in 2007 and have been a coach by trade ever since. In 2014, I started my own endurance company, and my husband eventually joined me there full time when his professional cycling career ended. So I've had quite a few years in dealing with and mentoring and coaching athletes from all walks of life, from a very novice level right up to those competing, on the international stage, including some professional teams, specifically cycling teams. And then I've also had a fair amount of experience working with runners and triathletes. So very much in the endurance space. And that's where my own personal expertise lies and my own personal experience lies as a cyclist myself, as well as runner. It's looking at these experiences through my coaching career and what I'm doing currently with athletes, and kind of assessing things and thinking, okay, where is the future? Where do we go from here with all the information that currently is available to us? Much of what I've experienced in my coaching is that on the one side, you have the science. So it's all the theory and the theoretical aspect of what and how you should be doing with athletes, and, how you should be training someone to improve, if it's just fitness or whether it's loftier goals of going to the Olympics or competing at the Tour de France. Then it's you have to ask the question, well, if I've got my theoretical side and I know the theory, I know the science, but how do I apply the science to my athlete? And that's where the art of this profession comes in, I think. Much of this is something that you learn along the way. And I'm sure you've probably heard from other performance coaches in the industry. They talk about the fact that it's not just about the science, but it's very much about your experience of the science in working with athletes. And it's so fascinating because you're just learning all the time. Each different person, there's always something to be learned, and you're never at your pinnacle. Yes, I've bumped my head quite a few times, and I've had to often use trial and error in trying to figure out what is going to work for my athlete. And sometimes you get it wrong, and that's the nature of this type of work. But it's about assessing what went wrong, and then taking those lessons and applying them. The bottom line for me was always that, or still is that what is going to work for this athlete in particular, not will I use this for athlete X, and so I can just replicate that and use it in athlete Y and expect the same outcome, because that just is never the case. And even if you look at twins in different environmental settings, they may have the same genetic code, but in different environmental settings, they might have a different response to certain stimuli. In this respect, I've always, looking at training and looking at how we apply the theory to athletes, I've never really been a fan of just generic training plans. So doing the same thing and offering the same kind of progression in training and fitness improvements for one and for everybody, doing the same thing for a multitude of people. And ultimately, what is the difference? And yeah, I think you probably all know what I'm going to say, but we are unique individuals each with a unique genetic code. And so it makes sense that we would respond differently to different things in our environment because, ultimately we are different in our genetic code. We live and interact with our different environments, and this obviously also has a big impact on how we develop and how, our performance develops as athletes. But an even bigger component is the genetics, as I've just said. And according to a study done by De Moor et al. In Amsterdam in 2007, it was actually found that 66% of the variance in an athlete's status can be explained by genetic factors. Now that's pretty big. If you think about it, more than half of what an athlete achieves in sport can be attributed to genetics. It kind of begs the question now, why are we not making use of this type of information more in what we're doing with prescribing training and the methods that are being used? I mean, there's a vast amount of information that is currently available telling us in different training methods, and Gerrida alluded to this last week when we chatted, highlighting things like the Norwegian method or the 80-20 training method. We've got big genetic differences, and we are not necessarily harnessing these genetic differences in a way that could potentially change performance outcomes substantially. Where do we sit today? Where do I sit? And really just fast forwarding to, from my days as a coach and experiencing what I was doing in our own business. Currently, I find myself in something quite mind-blowing, right in the middle of some groundbreaking work in the fitness genetics industry. And I'm so super excited to start sharing what I've learned and what I'm still learning, and what is changing the way that I've worked for so many years. And that is looking at genetics in training. I mean, I was introduced to genetic testing way back in 2015. At that stage, it was pretty new. There weren't many people doing it just as an everyday sort of test. And when I think back to the information that I was given at that stage, there were significant gaps in how the information could be applied to everyday decision making. So yes, I did the test, I got a report, I kind of read through my report, I kind of looked at the definitions and the genes, and it kind of yes, okay, it makes sense. I can understand it. But I really didn't know how to apply it to what I was doing each and every day. So I looked at my training genetics and I saw that, oh, yeah, I've got pretty good endurance genes. But what does that mean for me as a cyclist? Should I change the training that I'm doing? If I should change it, how should I change it? And those answers were never really clear. I think that's where we are sort of rolling towards now, is making that information very applicable to an individual on an individual basis, looking at what they're doing each and every day. So now I can use that information. I can relook. Obviously, my genetic information is not going to change over time. So I can relook at that information and I can start assessing or asking the questions and answering them. How do I train? What should I eat? How do I recover? What is my injury risk? And now that I've kind of working in the industry that I am now, in this groundbreaking work of producing a new fitness app that is coming to the market that's going to use this genetic information in a way that just simplifies the information into real actionable insights. It was back in 2022 that I was introduced to this company, and they were doing genetic testing, and I was commissioned to consult on devising training programs specific to genetic personas. Now, what is a genetic persona, you may ask, just as I did when I first arrived. But basically, it's a personal profile of your training genetics, your strengths, your weaknesses, but very specifically that pertain to how your body responds to training and what happens in your body when you train. And so, you may have very specific recovery needs, and you may have a high level of injury risk when training under load, which has sort of, high-reaching or far-reaching implications for when you are training. It really has been a fascinating journey of discovering my own genetic code and applying different training principles to get the best out of my body to what I had been doing previously. So, certain things I kind of intuitively knew just from, my experience of certain things in my training. And it, looking at the genetics, it kind of made sense of these things. But then certain things were complete revelation, like the fact that I am rather injury prone. That never occurred to me. When I think back on the difficulties that I have experienced in my training with particular injuries, I can now sort of look at the genetics and see, these are my areas that is a particular weakness for me, and I've got to be careful about how I build my training load, how I recover, instead of just looking at how my training is progressing and wanting to increase load further and further and further. But how do I do that in a clever way to make sure that I don't put my body at risk? So yeah, it's been a really, really interesting path of discovery for me. Similarly, I think for the colleagues that I work with that have now started looking at their training in a new light and understanding more about what is going to work for them in their training. And particularly as we become more and more pressed for time in the busy, busy world we live in, harnessing information that's actually going to simplify our lives and get us to our goals in the most efficient way possible. I had an interesting conversation with one of my clients this week, and she was asking me for some very specific pointers on nutrition and supplements and what should she be eating and supplementing with to enhance her training, to enhance her recovery. She's a cyclist in particular, but does swimming as well. She's not at a particularly high level, but she's a busy businesswoman, and she wants to, be at her best. She wants to perform well in her sports, but she also wants to, perform well in her business and ultimately be a fit and healthy, a well person. When we were chatting, I kind of thought to myself, well, the old coach in me would have listed off a ream of sort of generic recommendations, the good things to eat and what's going to help in her recovery. You know, the things like, taking protein after your workout session and potentially supplementing with L-glutamine, for instance. But I now find myself sort of rethinking that. And my port of call is now, well, what makes this person unique? And what are her specific needs that may make the recommendation different? Not only the fact that she's female, but what about the things that we cannot see that impact so heavily on how she will respond to her environment and the type of training that I give her? And if there are supplements to take, what should she be taking? I mean, there are a myriad of supplements out there. And quite honestly, you could end up buying for yourself about 20 different supplements at one time and taking them all. And probably half the time, those supplements are all just going to work against each other, not even cause a positive outcome at the end of the day. And you're just spending lots of money and throwing it down the drain. I think there's so many aspects to having information that's really pertinent to ourselves and how our body works and what's going to give us the best bang for our buck, so to speak. In today's world, we want quick answers. We want somebody just to tell me what to do to perform better, to live longer, to feel stronger. Just tell me, and I'll do that. We're always looking for the golden nugget. And unfortunately, I don't always think that life is that simple. But what I do know and what I've realized in this journey of mine is that we now have access to information that is truly revolutionizing our health, our wellness, and our fitness. It's giving us the tools to understand our starting points so that we can make informed decisions about what is going to work for our bodies. By having that information, it's really quieting down the noise that surrounds us all the time in this frantic, busy world where there is just so much information available to us at our fingertips whenever we want it. And so, starting from next week, I'm going to tackle the genetics of fitness, recovery, and injury, and attempt to give you some real insight into how powerful this information can be. Thanks so much for joining me today, and don't miss out on next week. I look forward to chatting to you then. Cheers.